Hey everyone, D here. I am here in my world for 5 Block Friday Season 2, and this week we're showing off this Hitomezashi stitch pattern generator. So if I come in here, I can turn on the 5 command blocks that make this creation work, and then grab just a couple items. We have a map, just to help us see what's going on, an armor stand, and a name tag, and then a leather cap just to help us see which way the armor stand is facing. And if we come out here to our big map-sized area, we can see this nifty pattern that is covering the entire grid. This is a family of patterns that's based out of a Japanese embroidery style, where each row and each column is just made up of very simple stitches, where the stitch will be, above the cloth and then below the cloth, and then above and below, back and forth. But each row and column just has a little bit of a different offset to create all sorts of different patterns. If you want to see some more in-depth information about it, I'd recommend this number file video from several years ago that goes over how these patterns can be generated. So here I have some other command blocks. These aren't part of the main creation. These are just setting up different templates to show some different patterns that can be generated. So this template just has the white and black wool to show whether the stitch will be, off or on in the first entry in this column or row. Then we take our armor stand. I'll give it a little hat to see which way it's facing, and another armor stand. And we give it the name tag Hitomezashi, and it will travel along and create the stitches that go with whatever pattern is set down below. And then we do the same thing on this one. And we get this very simple pattern of off on in both directions. Gives us this full grid zigzag. But of course, the patterns can get a bit more complicated for more detailed patterns. So here we have the off on pattern on our rows, but our columns go on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, over and over. And that will lead to a slightly more complicated pattern. Where we get this sort of back and forth wave design over the grid. This next pattern that I started with generates some interesting little flower patterns. The Japanese word for the stitch, which I am not going to attempt to pronounce, is named after the leaves on the end of persimmon plants. But you can see this fun little flower pattern created by the fairly simple stitch pattern along the side. And then finally, a more complicated pattern. This one is not quite the same repeating pattern because it mirrors itself in the center. So right here, it's mirrored left and right. And the same thing on the rows, there's a point where it gets mirrored. But this leads to a fairly complicated pattern in the middle. You can see all sorts of little squares and little plus signs. But if we look right at the middle, you can see there's actually a fairly large structure here of kind of interconnected plus signs that then goes all the way here. And then something else you can do with the stitch patterns that's pretty fun and that I have support for in this creation is instead of setting a pattern, you just tell it to generate randomly. So if we don't have any wool telling it what the pattern is, it will just randomly decide whether it starts on or off for each row and column. And that leads to some more chaotic random behavior in the patterns. But that is it for the capabilities of this data pack. Basically just the little armor stands named Hitomezashi try to make stitches to the left and right as they travel along. So now let's take a look at the 5 commands that make this all work. Our first command takes care of moving the armor stand forward and summoning helper entities on either side that will actually draw the stitch in later. To start, we execute as any entity named Hitomezashi. I should probably add a filter for just armor stands on here, but forgot to do that here. Then we update our execution position and rotation to match the armor stand, and then we check if the block underneath us is white concrete. If it's any other block, the command will stop here, and that will freeze generation for this armor stand. Then we move our execution position 2 blocks to the left. At this new position, we summon an area effect cloud. This is using the summon subcommand, which is different from the summon command. It doesn't allow us to directly set any entity data or have a position offset, but it does change the executing entity of the command to the new entity that we've summoned. Next, we use the store subcommand to effectively set all of that entity data that we can't set directly. Store success will return a 1 or a 0, depending on the result of whatever comes after the run statement in the command. Then, with the last 2 arguments on each line here, we can set the data type of the data we're storing and a multiplier. This allows us to store any numerical value that we want by assuming that we're going to get a success from whatever comes after the run statement and setting the data type. So on this first line, we're adding a flag to the entity called Hito_new that we can reference in later commands. Then we're adding another flag called Hito_helper that we can also reference later. The main difference here is that after this first tick, the Hito_new flag will be removed. Then we set the radius of the area effect cloud to be 1. This really could be any value we want. We set the duration of the area effect cloud to be 1. This is the maximum age of the area effect cloud in ticks. Then we set the starting age to be -1. This means that 2 ticks from now, without any intervention, this area effect cloud will naturally despawn. Then we set the wait time to 0. Normally, area effect clouds have a wait time before they actually become active, but we don't want to worry about that here. After we've set all the data for the area effect cloud, we move 4 blocks to the right. At this new position, we do the exact same thing again, summoning a second area effect cloud in the opposite direction from the armor stand. Then we move 2 blocks to the left, which should put us right back on top of the starting armor stand. Then we change our executing entity back to the original armor stand and update our rotation to be lined up with the armor stand again. Finally, we teleport the entity 2 blocks forward. This is guaranteed to be successful, I guess, unless we're at the very edge of the world for some reason. And so that means all of our store substatements from earlier should store the correct value. The second command block takes those new area effect clouds that we've just summoned and rotates them to face away from the main armor stand. Actually, I guess it makes them face towards the armor stand, but the purpose is so that they can move away from the armor stand. To start, we execute as the armor stand entity again. We change our execution position and rotation to match the armor stand, and then we change our position to be 2 blocks behind the armor stand. This should be where the armor stand was at the start of the tick, and its position that it was at when it summoned those area effect clouds. Then we execute as the nearest 2 area effect clouds that have the Hito_new tag, and then we rotate them to face the current execution position which is that position 2 blocks behind where the armor stand is, which is where the armor stand was when this command chain started. Our third command here takes care of the starting pattern for each of the individual area effect clouds. We start by executing as the area effect clouds that have that Hitomezashi tag on them. Then we change our execution position and rotation to match the entity. And then we check this inline predicate. This predicate's base type is any of, which allows us to set a list of subpredicates. And if any of those subpredicates pass, the entire predicate will pass. This first subpredicate is used for checking the random chance for making a random pattern. Its base type is all of, which, similar to any of, allows you to pass in multiple subpredicates, but in this case, they all need to pass for this one to pass. Our first subpredicate here is a location check, where we check if the block one block beneath us is either white or black concrete. In addition to being white or black concrete, we also have to pass a random chance check. This just has a 50% chance of passing or failing. The second subpredicate to our any of predicate is a location check, where we check if the block one block beneath us is white wool. If we pass the predicate, we then teleport the executing entity backwards 2 blocks. The fourth command takes care of actually drawing in the stitch pattern, as well as removing the new tag from the helper entity. We start by executing as all of the entities that have our helper tag. We then update our execution position and rotation to match the entity. We then move 1 block down, so our execution position is now in the ground, but facing the same way that the entity is facing. We then use the store command to clear the new flag from the entity, assuming the command is successful. We also use the store command to reset the age of the entity to -1 ticks, also assuming that the fill command is successful. We then fill the area from the position that we're at, is what the first 3 carets mean, to the position 2 blocks behind us. With this fill command, we're filling black concrete and we're replacing white concrete. That means if there is no white concrete in the region, the command will fail and the age of the area effect cloud will not be reset. The final command block takes care of moving the helper entity forward, or, as I've already gone over, backwards. We start by executing as all entities that have our helper tag. Then we update the command position and rotation to match the entity. And then we teleport the entity 4 blocks backwards. This will account for the 2 blocks of the stitch that it just drew, as well as the 2 blocks that need to not have the stitch on them. Well, that is it for episode 2 of 5 Block Friday Season 2. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, please consider leaving a like or a comment. And if you want to see more creations like this, please consider subscribing. In the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you all in the future.